So we're recording. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. So just thinking back again to the start of the semester, I posed the question, or we got the lecture that dealt with how old African people are. There's really three possible answers. One is 8 million years old, so that's an acceptable answer. Another answer that would be acceptable is unknown because we know that the more that they research, the more that they dig, older African people get. Um, Another answer that I would deem acceptable would be 7 million years, just because, again, anywhere from the 7 million to 8 million year mark is where those remains were found. So those would be the acceptable answers for how old African people are. 8 million years, 7 million years, or unknown, because the further that they dig, the older African peoples get. We mentioned that the modern human came on the scene about 200,000 years ago. But research has complicated that fact, saying it can be traced back as far as 340,000 years ago in Cameroon. And then the large migration out of Africa could be traced back about 60,000 years ago. So keep that information in mind. Also, when we started the semester, we asked the question, who are significant African individuals prior to European contact? Here's a list of them there. We have Narmer. He was able to, he was a unifier of Kemet, and he was the first dynasty pharaoh, right? We have Imhotep, the world's first multi-genius, architect, physician, engineer, scribe. He built the first step pyramid, and he's also recognized as a priest, sage, poet, scribe, and astrologer. We also have Akhenaten, 18th dynasty pharaoh. He ruled for 17 years, 1336 BCE to 1334 BCE, or 1334, excuse me. And he's noted for transitioning Kemet into a monotheistic society, right? So going from polytheism, which is the worship of multiple gods, transitioning into monotheism, which is the focus of one god, Ten. We have Taharka, one of the greatest ancient Kemetic pharaohs. He was described in the ancient Greek history as Starbo. We know he was able to push his empire as far as Europe, as far as Spain. We also have Mansa Musa. We know that Mansa Musa is the richest man on the planet still as today, right? Had a large building program, building mosques and schools and colleges. The University of Sankara was one of the universities that was built under his reign. In the height of his power, Mali had at least 400 cities, okay? So these are the African individuals prior to European contact, and then how old African peoples can be traced. So I've mentioned you'll have 5 questions. You only have to answer 3 of the 5 questions. For the answers, though, you will need to provide a theoretical framework, okay? These are the theoretical frameworks that we've covered for the most part. We haven't really touched into critical race theory, the account of storytelling, too much, but I'll explain it now. But let's start with the first one. And this is the first theoretical framework that we covered for the semester. It really ties in with the lecture and the information that was found in regards to how old African people are and Africans prior to European contact. This theoretical framework. So another thing too, right? There's often theories and then there's the framework, okay? So keep in mind that the theory is African American male theory, okay? So AAMT is the theory. Now the framework is a little bit different. So this is what the theory is saying. African American boys and men are resistant and resilient. African American male theory posits that African American boys and men are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. So that's the framework, right? That African people are resilient and resistant, and they're born with innate capacity for self-determination and unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. So that's the framework that this theory works through, okay? So you got to keep in mind there's a distinction between what the theory is and what the framework of that theory is, okay? Again here, going into the second one, critical race theory, that's the theory, right? Just as African American male theory is the theory. Now, the framework is counter storytelling, okay? Um, the way that history is presented in this course is a counter storytelling framework. Think about how in your typical other classes, African history is presented, right? Typically, they start African history or they'll trace it back as far as the process of enslavement, right? But within this course, we do a counter storytelling narrative where we take that beyond enslavement, okay? So this whole course is counter storytelling in effect, right? But so counter storytelling is opposed to focus on the narratives of the dominant culture, right? Euro Americans. The focus is placed on telling the narrative from the perspective of those who are marginalized by the dominant culture. Culturally responsive teaching models are examples of counter storytelling in academic practice, retelling with great emphasis the histories of people of culture that often go ignored, right? And if you think about what this class has been doing, we're telling the histories of people who have gone ignored, right? So this is what the framework of counter storytelling is. So when you think about a possible question and using these questions to address, sorry, using these frameworks to address the questions on the midterm, it may sound like this. The question may ask you, how old are African people? Who's a significant individual prior to European contact? And why is this information important, right? So you have to use you have to use a theoretical framework to answer that question. So the answer may sound like this. From a counter storytelling framework, African people can be traced back 8 million years. A significant individual prior to European contact is Imhotep, as he was the first physician, the first architect, and one of the first astrologers. This information becomes important from a counter storytelling perspective because these individuals often get left out of history. Um, Imhotep is not recognized as the father of medicine in the dominant society. So this information becomes important because a counter storytelling perspective places emphasis and focus on these cultures that have been ignored, right? So that's a way that you would answer the question using these theoretical frameworks to answer your question. Does that make sense to you guys? Let me know if it doesn't, because for the past 2 years that I've been teaching this, and I have these midterms, and I ask students to use these theoretical frameworks. They do well on everything else except using the theoretical frameworks. And it's not that they use them wrong; they just forget to use them. So I don't know if it's not using them because they don't know or they just ultimately forget. But that's the biggest thing that I see points taken off of is these theoretical frameworks. So I want to make sure that we take the time so you guys understand what what these frameworks are. So does that make sense?
Can you provide an example for like the first framework?
hmm So I'll answer the same question that I posed, and I'll use the answer for the first framework, right? So, how old are African people? What's the significant individual prior to European contact, and why is this information important? Right, that's the question. So, using a African American male theory framework that states African people are resistant and resilient with an innate capacity for brilliance and self determination. um, African people can be traced back 8 million years old. A significant individual prior to European contact is Taharka, as he was able to push the Kemetic Empire into Europe. And this information becomes important through the framework of African American male theory because it situates African people as people of agency, of people of intelligence, and in self determination. So, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and for like the question, will we have to include both of the frameworks or we
No,
choose one?
good question. So, just one framework per question.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. So this framework here we use quite a bit, right? Funds of knowledge, and this just speaks to the importance of the family unit and community structure in these communities, recognizing the power in the community's forms of knowledge, engaging in thinking that moves funds of knowledge into more historical forms of social capital, right? So that's just the information that you may get from your grandmother, right? The information that you may get from the neighbor in the community or the elder in the community who imparts wisdom on you, right? This is this idea and this notion of funds of knowledge that also can be used as a framework to answer the questions. Um, so the midterm will be essay format. It won't be multiple choice. It'll be essay. Um, so these ones we talked about very sparingly. Fugitivity is the act of stealing oneself, the state of constant flight from captivity. So if you think about Africans who were placed in enslavement, due to their enslaved conditions, they were considered property. So at the moment you try to free yourself from enslavement, you become a fugitive because you're stealing property, right? So this is this notion of fugitivity. You're constantly in flight. You're constantly trying to avoid the capture, right? Is what Fred Moten says, to live without leaving a trace. Okay, it's this notion of fugitivity. And then maroonage is the process of extracting oneself from slavery, relating to groups of runaways who became maroons in the swamps of the southern states of the United States and parts of the enslaved territories. Also, you find the maroons in Jamaica. So this is essentially that individuals who engaged in fugitivity that were able to set up communities to keep themselves free from the institution of enslavement, right? So this idea or this framework of maroonage. So those are the theoretical frameworks. So what we got, 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 that you could use. Again, 5 questions. You only have to answer 3, but for each question, you must use a framework. You could use the same framework for each question if you so choose, but I would encourage you to kind of engage different frameworks and so you can kind of work through them. These frameworks are not going nowhere. So when we do your group projects, I will ask you guys to engage a framework to work through your group projects, okay? So take your time, make sure that you understand how these frameworks operate. If you need to, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, and I can provide you more information or we can discuss this in more detail. But again, most times when people lose points on their tests with me, it's because they either did not, because they just didn't use the theoretical framework. So please make sure you're understanding that, okay? So some of the readings that we covered, and this is some of the themes that you find within the reading, right? And these questions should kind of prompt you to think about the reading and kind of make you remember some of the things that was covered in the reading, okay? So what is the significance in the name? Sorry, what is the significance of the name in the African context? What does this mean for the author of the text? This kind of engaged us in our conversation around purpose, okay? Another thing that helps you think about the Somé text of Water and Spirit, the difficulty of the English language as a means of effectively translating African occurrences. What does this mean for Somé, who is the author? How does one's culture shape one's understanding of what can be and what is considered real? You could think about his articulations of Star Trek to help you think about this question here. How does Somé problematize notions of primitivism and modernism or modernization? And then what is Somé's solution to alienation produced by modernity? And again, these are questions that we have that will help you think about the text. So think about, so maybe revisit your journal and think about ways to be able to answer the questions as it pertains to the Water and Spirit text. We have Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind. A couple of questions again to help you recenter yourself in the text. According to Ngugi, what is the cause of the problems in Africa? How does Ngugi understand the role of language as it pertains to shaping culture? What becomes significant about the Conference of African Writers in English Expression or English Language? And then what, according to Ngugi, is the impetus of the physical and spiritual subjugation? And again, that will be found within the text, Decolonizing the Mind. Then we have Glissant's Poetics of Relation. This is the open book reading that we did. How does the juxtaposition of the written, and the oral manifest according to Glissant? And I believe that is on the opening page of that text, towards the bottom of the text of the page. Excuse me. Why is the open boat symbolic? What is Glissant provoking his readers to envision? What is the significance of the belly of the boat being pregnant? The three metamorphoses of the abyss, and then why is Glissant so attentive to this idea, this notion of relations? So again, that's Poetics of Relations, the chapter titled The Open Boat. Any questions about any of these three texts so far? And again,
Yeah, sorry, I had a question.
yeah.
So the question on the essay, or I mean for the midterm, are going to be based off these readings, obviously. But is it going to be like, are the questions exactly or somewhat formatted like that, or they're different?
These are not how the questions would sound on the midterm. The questions are probably going to sound more like the example I gave earlier, in the sense of, how old are African people? What's a significant individual prior to European contact? And why is this information important? The questions will probably more sound like this, juxtaposed to what you're reading here. With that being said, notice how there's really like three questions in one question, right? So I'm going to be expecting you guys to address all of the questions within that one question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So that's another thing that caused people to miss points. They may address how old African people are. They may tell me who's a significant African individual prior to European contact, but they won't state why this information becomes important, right? So that would cause the individual to lose 1 point. So just read the questions thoroughly, so that way you can address all aspects of the question.
Professor?
Yeah.
Like just a question. So when we answer the questions, we also have to like provide evidence from the text, like saying why that is the answer.
Yeah, especially if it asks why, or asks why does it significant, then yes, you definitely want to do that. It may not say provide information from the reading. I might not ask that, and if it doesn't, I wouldn't stress it. But it's always good to center your answer in what we read, right? Because the question is going to be evolving around the reading. So you definitely want to ground your answer in that text and pull from the text to be able to create your answer. Does that make sense, Claudia?
Yes, thank you.
You sure you sound like a little hesitant?
It just no, I think I just need a little bit more examples of like how to answer questions.
Okay,
Like get full points.
let me do this. We'll go through this, and I'll try to pull. I'll see if I have another test from another class, and we'll kind of use that as an example to give you a more of a clearer picture. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have, okay, so we'll move down to Hurston's of Mule and Men. Remember, this is the text that was really written in what you call Pidgin English, right? The folklore text. So, what is the significance of folklore as it pertains to the African oral tradition? How does Hurston articulate acts of subversion? How is the griot personified in Mules and Men? Then think about the elders, right? Think about what I said as far as visiting your grandparents when you can. That situates this notion of the griot. And then which theoretical framework best suits Hurston's project? So let's kind of take some time with that, because I think this is a good question, and it's a great way for you guys to understand this idea of theoretical frameworks. So we know that Hurston's book is about folklore, and we know folklores are stories that are designed to, create meaning for certain things. And folklore is something that's passed down from generation to generation, right? So we know of folklore based on the text. So we're going to go back up to our theoretical frameworks. We have African American male theory. We have critical race theory, counter storytelling framework. We have funds of knowledge. We have fugitivity, and we have maroonage. Out of the 5 theoretical frameworks, which ones do you think best fits this idea of folklore?
It would be funds of knowledge, no?
Yeah. Funds of knowledge. And technically, right, it could be like, I mean, really, you could make an African American male theory work. You could use that and it could work. Counter storytelling, it could work. But the best one by far would be funds of knowledge, right? Because what is funds of knowledge about? It's the importance of the family and the community passing down knowledge, right? And engaging in thinking, and that moves funds of knowledge into more historical and social capital forms, right? So it's just really about those who are close to you, those who are within your community. How do they go about the process of passing down knowledge? And one of the ways of doing so is through this notion of folklore that that Hurston situates her text in. So that you guys kind of see how the theoretical frameworks work within the questions. Does that help a little bit make more understanding of that? Okay.
Yeah, it makes more sense.
Okay. And then keep in mind, we're just going to spend the whole day on this today. So if you need me to kind of go deeper, we could do that. So the next text, and then I'm going to throw in a little bit of the fire next time. So the other Baldwin text that we read, I'm going to have that incorporated as well. So kind of be thinking about this text also, okay? But what are Baldwin's pillars of white inferiority? We know we have the maintenance of white innocence. We know we have the white imagination as those pillars. What does Baldwin do with the multiple interpretations of the Negro spiritual, right? And this is how those songs that the Africans in the town were singing, how they were disturbing Jesse, right? What does the dynamics between Jesse and Otis say about raising black children juxtaposed to raising white children? This is something that we discussed quite a bit. And then what is the historical significance of the picnic? And how does this relate to Baldwin's story? And how does epigenetics fit in Baldwin's critique of society? And remember, epigenetics is the process of passing down trauma from one generation to the next, right? So how does that work within the story Going to Meet the Man? So those are the readings for the most part we'll be covering on the midterm. Give me one second, I'm trying to fan. So those are the readings that we'll be covering on the midterm. Again, I would just try to spend some time in answering those questions to the best of your ability based on your journals, based on the lectures that we had in class, based on the resources that you have on your disposal. Try to go through and answer those questions. If you're able to do so, you'll be fine on the midterm. Give me 1 second. Let me try to pull up a question from another class's midterm, and that way I can kind of give you guys a better example of how I'm looking for these questions to be answered. Let's see what I got. Okay. So this is a midterm from a TV and film class I taught last semester. But it just gives you a good example of how the questions will be framed, right? How does the East-West binary lead to the flattening of non-Western cultures? So that's one question, right? How does colonialism produce the devaluation of colonized cultures? Two questions. And how does the work of Spivak, the subaltern, and Said, Orientalism, problematize this flattening, right? So really, there's three questions within this one question. You see what I'm saying? So you want to make sure you're addressing how the East-West binary leads to the flattening of non-Western cultures. You want to make sure you're addressing how colonialism produces the devaluation of colonized culture. And you want to address how the work of Spivak and Said problematizes this flattening of non-European cultures, right? So that's what I say. That's what I mean when I say you have, three questions built within one question. Does that make sense to you, Claudia, when I say that?
Wait, I have a question.
What's your question, Mark?
So is it as a question? So we pick one of those, or like one question of those, or we
Right.
do all of them?
So you have 5 questions. So question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4, question 5, right? You have to choose 3 of those questions to answer. So you could choose question 1 to answer, you could choose question 2 to answer, and choose question 3, right? Those are the 3 out of the 5 that you're going to answer. But when you're answering question 1, make sure you answer question 1 completely, right? Because again, there's sub questions built within question 1. Right? So question 1, the entire question is, how does the East-West binary lead to the flattening of non-Western cultures? How does colonialism produce the devaluation of colonized culture? And how does the work of Spivak and Said problematize this flattening? So that's the whole question for question 1, right? But again, within that entire question, there's sub-questions. So the first sub-question is, how does the East-West binary lead to the flattening of non-Western culture? So that's your first sub-question. Your second sub-question is, how does colonialism produce the devaluation of colonized culture? So that's your second sub-question. Then your third sub-question is, how does the work of Spivak and Said problematize this flattening? So does that kind of answer your question, Mark? Does that make it clearer for you?
Yeah. So in each essay question, we had to put it in essay format.
Yes, it would be an essay format.
I have a question.
Go for it.
To answer, so I know we're answering the 3 questions. So how many paragraphs do you recommend? Like 3 paragraphs in total, or it's up to us
It's up
completely?
to you guys. It's up to you guys. What I'm looking for is that you answer the question completely. I'm looking for that you use a theoretical framework. So if you use a theoretical framework and you answer the question completely, and you're able to do that in 3 sentences, cool. You got a complete answer, right? But if you give me like 5 paragraphs but don't use a theoretical framework, or you don't answer the questions completely, then you'll lose points. So I'm not really tripping off of the length or the duration of the question, more so that I'm looking for the question to be answered completely. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
And Mark, to answer your question in the chat, yes, there should be 3 essays to accompany each question. And how you guys choose to form those questions is totally up to you. It's kind of like your journals. I'm not really tripping off the format. I'm just tripping off the fact that you guys, have everything complete. How are you guys feeling as far as the example questions? Does that make sense of what the questions may look or feel like, or do you want me to go over one more?
Can you go over one more, please?
Yeah. Let's see. We won't do 4 because that's a little bit too close to our. All right, so we'll deal with. We'll deal with Césaire, and we'll deal with question 2. So, according to Césaire, what is the boomerang effect of colonialism? How does this intersect with his utilization of Hitler in his argument? What is the thesis of discourse on colonialism, and what is the methodological approach utilized by Césaire? Do you deem his method effective? Right. So again, we know that all of this makes up the complete question for question number 2. But again, within this complete question, we have sub-questions. So the first sub-question, according to Césaire, what is the boomerang effect of colonialism? That's sub-question number 1. How does this intersect with Hitler and his argument? That's sub-question number 2. And then what is the thesis of discourse on colonialism? And what is the methodological approach utilized? So that's sub-question number 3 and 4, right? So what is the thesis is sub-question number 3. What is the methodological approach is sub-question number 4. And then sub-question number 5 is, do you deem his methods effective, right? So that's the 5th sub-question within question number 2. What that may sound like to answer the question using a theoretical framework, right? So according to counter storytelling as a theoretical framework, Césaire articulates the boomerang effect of colonialism as the colonizers throw out oppression, subjugation, marginalization, and inhumanity, right? That subjugation, that repression, that inhumanity is returned back to them, the oppressors themselves, because that's the work that a boomerang does, right? Whatever you throw back, it comes back to you. This intersects with the utilization of Hitler in his argument, because Césaire articulates that the only problem that Europe had with Hitler was the fact that Hitler was doing his atrocities to other Europeans, right? So Hitler becomes inhumane because he's imposing these atrocities on the Jews within Europe, but he's no different from the other Europeans who are opposing these atrocities all outside of Europe and all throughout the world, right? Let me see. The thesis of discourse on colonialism is that colonialism not only makes the colonized inhumane, it more so makes the colonizers inhumane, which is his thesis. His methodological approach is the counter argument, is a discourse, right? It's an argumentation, is his approach. And I do deem his methods effective from a counter storytelling perspective, because when you talk about colonialism, you rarely hear the colonized implicated as being inhumane, right? So that's me using a theoretical framework, and that's me answering every component of those questions. Does that make sense?
So essentially, when we're answering questions, the question is like our prompt, and then we're answering the questions with using a framework and then knowledge from the readings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Do you guys want to try to answer one just to see how it feels, to see, we'll see what it feels like to attempt it and try to use a theoretical framework, or you just want to kind of work on that on your own?
Try one.
Okay, let's do number 4, because that's the only thing that you guys read that's on this essay. So the question for number 4 is, how does Glissant articulate the notion of relationship subversion? What are some of the examples you can provide from relationship subversion? Why is the concept of relation so important to Glissant? How does he articulate the importance through his assessment of creolization? How does the statement live in seclusion or open up to the other provoke notions of global? Yeah, actually, I'm sorry. You guys didn't read this. Let me see. Okay. Notions of power, consciousness. Okay, this is what we'll do. Will you answer this question and then just give me a theoretical framework, and then answer how does the notion of stereotypes inform Baldwin's pillars of white inferiority, the maintenance of white innocence, and the white imagination. So yeah, let's use a theoretical framework to answer that question. Nobody wants to try it? Okay. I mean, you don't have to.
For that one, like, how I say theoretical framework, and
Mhm.
then would we go back to like the worksheet you gave us?
Mm-hmm.
Can it relate maybe to the critical race theory?
Yeah. So counter storytelling. Yep, it sure can. Yeah. So how would you use counter storytelling to talk about Baldwin's pillars of white inferiority?
Because we could say that how they ignored the problem, and so it just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
So ignoring the problem, Trisha, is that the maintenance of white innocence, or is that the white imagination?
I think that's the maintenance of white innocence, because they're not taking accountability for their actions. I feel like the white imagination would be more like like pretending it doesn't. Actually, I'm not sure.
No, I mean you're right. You're absolutely right. You know what I mean? You hit it right on the head, and that's what I would be looking for, right? So just kind of clean up what you're saying. Excuse me. Through a counter storytelling framework, um, looking at Baldwin's pillars of white inferiority, particularly the maintenance of white innocence, these intersect because their attempts to maintain this notion of innocence causes them to not take into account what's really going on, right? And this becomes a counter storytelling approach because in dominant societies, you don't look at what's being ignored. We take these notions of innocence at face value and we believe them to be true, right? So that's using your theoretical framework to answer the question. Do you, so, let me stop sharing. So, as it pertains to the midterms, what other questions do you guys have? What seems a little unclear, seems a little, confusing? What can I address for you further?
I
Well,
want to. I
We're
want
gonna
to
take it like all together, or are you gonna assign it and then we have like a week to do it, or how is it?
So, you guys are Monday, Wednesday, so I'll send this out on Thursday, and you have to have this back to me by Tuesday of next week. So, just kind of give you an accurate date. Give me 1 second. So on Thursday, the 8th of April, I'll email this out to everybody. It'll also be posted on the Google Classroom site. And then Tuesday, the 13th of April, you would have to submit that back to me along with your journal. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, like before midnight or like before.
Yeah, before midnight, Tuesday. Tonight, did you have a question?
You just answered it for me.
Oh, okay, good. All right, any other questions?
Actually, it's regarding the journals and submitted. Like, would you let us remind us how many there is? Or
Yeah, I was actually going to do that once we got done with the midterm. I was going to walk through the amounts of readings and how many journal entries that you guys should have. So
okay.
yeah, so before that, I just want to make sure that that does sound about right, Trisha, but we'll verify for sure. But I just want to make sure that everybody's good and they feel comfortable with the midterm before we transition into the journals. Any other questions about the midterm?
So this can be our midterm, and then our final project is going to be like the group one.
Yep.
Okay, just
Yep.
check.
So there's no
So the
final.
midterm is just like solo, and then the final one is the group one.
Correct. Yeah. So we're not going to do like a final paper or a final test or anything like that. Your final will be your group project. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So I'm going to go to the Google Classroom site. We'll cover the readings that we've already addressed. And I'll let you guys know how many journal entries I'll be expecting. Give me 1 second. Okay. So that's 1. That's 2. That's 3. So we have 3 for the for weeks 1 through 3. So Hilliard teaching the Ptah-hotep is 1. Karanga parts 1, 2, and 3 is 2, and then the Kemetic Proverbs, that'll be the 3rd reading. So 3 so far from weeks 1 through 3. We have Someh, Water of Spirit, so that's 1. Ngugi, Decolonizing the Mind, that's 2. And then Glissant, Poetics of Relation, that's 3. So I didn't technically assign that. It's there, but I didn't assign that, so I won't count that against you guys. So 1, 2, 3. So that's another 3. And then we have Hurston, Mules of Men. Baldwin, Going to Meet the Man. So that's 2. And then Letter to My Nephew. That would be the third one. So it should be 9 journal entries. And then what will happen is there will be I'll have an assignment for your journal entries. And you'll just submit your journal entries here for this assignment, and then I'll grade them and get those back to you as soon as possible when you submit your midterm. Does that make sense?
Did you say
So in
9?
total is 10 journals? Oh, sorry.
9 journal entries.
Okay.
You submit at the same time as our midterm?
Yeah, they're due at the same time. There was one more question I heard. Do you guys need me to go over the readings again, or are you be good with the 9? Does that sound right to you guys?
Okay.
Can you go over the readings again?
Yeah. All right. So we had Hilliard, The Teaching of Ptah-hotep. That's the oldest book of the world, excuse me. So that's 1. We had the Kemetic Proverbs. That's 2. And then we had the Ma'at readings. So that would be 3. Does that sound right for you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, quick question. For those the Kemetic proverbs and the Krengamat, that one you had us read the same week, right? So because I only did 1 journal entry, but I forgot to do one for the Kemetic proverb.
Okay. Is anybody else had that same issue?
I think I did that too.
Yeah, I put them both in the same week. I put week 1 and week 2 in my journals.
Okay.
In the in one paragraph.
Okay, bet that's fine. So what we'll do is we won't count that as a journal entry. All right. So we'll just say 2 entries for weeks 1 through 3. So you'll be responsible for the teaching of Ptah-hotep. You'll be responsible for the Ma'at readings. So we'll say for weeks 1 through 3, it's only 2 entries. So for weeks 4 through 7, Water and Spirit, that's 1. And Gugi, Decolonizing the Mind, that's 2. And then Glissant, Poetics of Relation, The Open Boat, that's 3. So we'll have 3 entries for weeks 4 through 7. Does that sound good with everybody? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. And then for the most recent section, we had Hurston's Mules of Men. We had Baldwin, Going to Meet the Man. So that's 2. And then we had Baldwin, Letter to My Nephew. So that would be the third one. So that would give us a total of 8. Does that sound more aligned with what you guys have?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay. So I'll be looking for 8 journal entries. And then again, you can submit them here. And I'll get those graded and get those back to you as soon as possible. Again, the deadline for the journals is the same deadline for the midterm, Tuesday before midnight. The midterm study guides, I emailed them out to you, but they're also located here. And then the midterm will be emailed out to you on Thursday, but you would also be able to find the midterm itself here as well. Any questions about any of that? Check the chat real quick. It will be due next Tuesday. Yes, Carla. So if that's what you're asking me, it will be due on the 13th of April by midnight.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Wait, we could see the midterm right now, like we're at the bottom of your screen.
No, it's not. It's uploaded, but it's not public yet.
Okay.
So you guys won't. So Thursday, you'll be able to click on this and open up the midterm. And I'll email it out also on Thursday. So I'm gonna close out here. So is there any questions about anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you this wasn't the beginning of when we started doing the journals, but it was like in the middle, and you told us to like start adding a question with that. Will we have to go back to like the first couple of weeks? No? Okay.
I wouldn't do that to y'all.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're good. Any other questions? So I have a question for y'all. Now that we went through the midterm review, how do you feel about the midterm? You feel prepared, anxious, nervous, good about it? How do you feel?
More prepared.
Prepared.
I guess you explained it better, so I think we'll be good.
Okay. I hope so. More prepared. All right. Don't be nervous, man. It's not as bad as you think. I know, like hearing the questions being framed in that way. Don't stress it. Just read. Take your time and read through the questions. Right. I'm giving you what Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You have 5 days to do it. Right. So set yourself up for success. Don't wait to the last day. Don't wait to the last hour to do that shit. Like start. Thursday, Friday. So that way you're not rushing. Because what happens is if you don't leave yourself a lot of time, you either skip a component of the question or you forget your theoretical framework. So one of the things to really set yourself up for success is to set yourself up for success and don't wait to the last minute to do it, right? You have several resources. You have your journals. You have the actual lectures that we covered. Those are available to you as well on the Google Classroom site. You have your peers, right? Reach out to each other. I'm not saying to take the test together, but in order to prep for the test, rely on each other. Any other questions?
When the test is available to us, is it like gonna be like where we click and it's like a PDF form or okay.
Yeah, it'll be just like how things are set up on the Google Classroom site. You'll click on it and it'll open up the link like you would when you get a reading, right? It'll be the same thing. And I'm also going to email you guys out the test also. So you'll have both ways to access the test.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Do we submit a Word document or is like an entry I have already set up?
For the midterm or for the journal?
For the midterm.
Yeah, it'll be like a Word, a PDF type of document that you'd have to submit, and there'll be a section on the Google Classroom site to submit the midterms. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Anybody else?
I thought the journals were due today for some reason, so I kind of rushed one of them. Would I be able to unsubmit and then submit like a better version of my journal entry?
Yeah, that's cool. Just just put like a little note on it for me so that way I know that that's what happened. I don't misgrade the wrong one. But yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. If some pop up, just shoot me a text, shoot me an email. One thing I do want to discuss with you guys for next week, right? I'm aware that I'm assigning the midterm, and I don't want to assign readings and a midterm for you guys in the same week. Let me see something. One second. And you guys have the first chance to address this conversation before Group B, but I'm curious to hear what you guys thought. How would you feel about watching a video, right? We have like a hour speech from Malcolm X, or do you feel like that's a lot to try to do along with your midterm?
I feel like, well, personally, I feel like it's a lot because we also have other midterms right now.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry?
But I don't know what everyone else thinks. But I think it's a lot. I don't know.
Okay. It would be due for next week's class, Victor. So when we met next Monday, we would be talking about this speech. But I already heard Isis says it's a lot, Mark says it's a lot, Trish says a lot. So to me, that's enough to say that that's a lot. Okay, so we won't do that. But we have to do something when we meet next week, okay? So what we're gonna do for next week's meeting is we'll choose our groups for the group presentation. So what we'll do is if it would save us time, right? If you guys had listened to these songs before we meet on Monday, but if not, we'll take the time on Monday. We'll listen to the songs, and then I'll have you guys choose which song you want to cover for your project, and then whatever song you choose will determine what group you're in. So with that being said, though, if you are in Group B, I do ask that you come to Group B's meeting because the class is divided up evenly, and I want to make sure that the groups are evenly divided. So what we'll do is, if you can, great, listen to these songs before we meet next week. If not, don't worry. We'll take some time and we'll go through the songs and we'll allow you guys to choose what group you want, and then that will be our meeting for the week. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. So that will be the plan. Is there any other questions for me? All right. There's no further questions. We are done for the day. Again, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Don't hesitate to shoot me a text. If you guys have questions, I'll be happy to clarify whatever is needed. Other than that, you guys have a good rest of your day, and I will see you next Monday.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.